right. My name is Roshan Manjunath. I'm the executive director of Artly World, the nonprofit. We are a 501c3 nonprofit, and I'm glad you all are joining us here. Thank you for coming. This is an endeavor, as you can see, the age of AI. So a lot of things are changing. There is not an industry that AI might not disrupt. So I was at Google 2 weeks ago talking about the same thing. One of my biggest takeaway from that meeting was that we have to change our thinking, how we look at opportunities, how we look at our jobs. Everything's going to be redefined. Everything's going to be different. We definitely have to think about art and creative process. The definition of art is going to change. We're talking about synthetic art, human created art, and then there is layers of things that are going to fall on top of each other. And in terms of just talking about data, from my understanding, we will have a mix of natural human data and synthetic data that will determine how our future will be, devised, created, or how we envision it. And this is an endeavor for you all artists to learn about AI. So we have Jessica, our expert, who's going to help us develop a deeper understanding of how AI works, machine learning works, LLMs, and all that stuff, and also understand how you can use these as a tool to leverage your creativity, your art, your business, your entrepreneurial journey. We don't know, good or bad. It's too soon to choose. Opportunity, threat, AI. We don't know at this point in time. But the biggest challenge right now is going to be between artists who will embrace technology, embrace AI, and use that to leverage versus artists who don't. And maybe 6 months, 1 year down the lane, we'll know, what are the benefits of AI and what are the challenges of AI. Without taking too long, please share this with your friends and family, whoever is wanting to learn about AI and who is an artist. And we will do more of these talks. This will be a series, and keep coming back. We want to have a conversation. We want to have a debate. We want to understand your concerns, your challenges, and we also want to interface this with the big tech and give them a perspective of how artists see AI as a technology and AI as an opportunity. All right, I'll let Jessica take over, and she's going to start enlightening us.
Thank
Jessica?
you so much.
Thank
yeah. Oh, sweet. Yes, I can definitely do a mic check. Let me just make absolutely sure. I think it's on. So thank you guys, and thank you, Roshan. That was a really awesome opening, and I want to thank Miranda and Sky as well for helping set up this awesome room and making this possible. It takes a village for sure to set things like this up, and it seems like a really awesome organization to be aligned with, so I'm excited to be here. So definitely artists in the age of AI. I think that was an awesome intro, and we'll go straight into the agenda, which I think will kind of give you all a good perspective of the kind of the journey we plan to talk about today, and where where we as artists, as technologists fit in. And as we mentioned, it's a fairly intimate group, so feel free to interject. This is a conversation. This, doesn't have to be stagnant. It's definitely open for you all to prompt with any thoughts or questions. So please feel free to do so. So we'll start off with an intro, a bit about my background, a bit about my experience as an artist, a bit about my experience in my own career generally, and how I got here, and kind of the intersection of both art and technology. Then we'll go into a high-level definition of machine learning and artificial intelligence, what those mean at a high level, and kind of how that applies to what we're talking about today, which is their application directly in the space of the arts, right? In the space of design, whether that's three-dimensional, two-dimensional, and we won't go too deep into other arts like music and other forms of arts. This is more on the visual art side, but with the asterisk of, AI and ML, like Roshan mentioned, is transforming and disrupting, across all industries and sectors. So we'll go into that, and then we'll do a demo, and then we'll go into discussions and end with resources. There's a nice handout with some of those links if you guys are curious about certain links or certain resources. And my contact info is on that paper, so y'all are welcome to reach out. I would love to exchange accounts or what have yous with you all if you all are interested in that. So I'll start off. So a bit about my background. So this is my kind of Instagram screenshot, if you will, of a couple of the pieces that I've done throughout the years. It's not exhaustive, but, and actually this is a mural that I took a picture of. So excluding that, a lot of mixed media. I do use, things that I find outside in the world, such as jewelry, beads, acorn. I find a lot of inspiration in nature. And my background, to give you a bit of context, is, I have Salvadoran roots. I was born in El Salvador, raised here in Austin from a young age. So at 3 years old, I came to the States and grew up in Austin. So I do feel like a native Austinite, despite not being born here. But then I moved to Boston. Life took me there, and I'll get into that a bit. And then I came back here for another 2 years. My time is now also coming to a close and moving back to New York, but always open and love the community of kind of art that Austin has. A lot of live music, but just generally as far as I've seen, the cross-cultural aspect, Mexico right across the border with a lot of other influences as far as culture. And I really like this community. And of course, I'm biased, but that's a bit about my background and influences. And I think you see a lot of that in my art, a lot of tropical themes and yeah, so suffice to say, then, as a young artist, I started my sort of journey when I was, 6 years old, just scribbling. And I think my parents were very encouraging of that. And I kind of continued as I grew into an art teacher who was extremely encouraging of what she saw skills at the time. And it was, in my eyes, more interest and fascination with different mediums and, everything from cubism. She did have us explore kind of the more classic route of, cubists like Picasso and, surrealists and looked at the more traditional artists and painters that we kind of look to when we think of classical and fine arts as like a study. And that opened up a whole Pandora's box for me of interest of the different kinds of styles, the different kinds of mediums. And I got fascinated and hooked. So by the time I was in high school, that's actually a painting that I did back in high school. It had airbrush, acrylic, and pencil. I got really hooked on just, playing with different styles, but also playing with different mediums, and just went from there. And different topics. I remember finding a lot of inspiration from National Geographic magazines, just because I thought they were so raw. Those pictures were so impactful. So just, to give you kind of some insight as to my inspiration. So linguistics and computer science is actually what I ended up studying in college. A bit left field, if you will, from the humanities. It wasn't, art or traditional kind of more artistic or humanities, but it did have a humanistic aspect. And I'll say linguistics was something that I was explicitly drawn to, like I said, because of my cross-cultural background and upbringing, right? Coming from a Spanish-speaking household and then going into and immersing myself into an English-speaking community was very interesting. And I thought, I studied natural language processing as a study towards the end, but initially, foundationally, we looked at things like code switching. So why someone would say, this is super chévere, like why would you switch from English to Spanish in the middle of a sentence? What value does that add? So very interesting, because linguistics is also both an art and a science in my eyes. And so seeing that you can apply things like computer science foundations in computer science technology to a more humanities, what I considered at the time a more soft sort of humanities field, was very interesting, and why I thought, this is what I want to study. This is a really cool intersection of tech and humanities. I ended up being exposed to the Air Force because I was an avid runner, and I actually, didn't think that I was going to join, but then they said, well, you'd be going to Boston for your first assignment. And I thought, well, that's basically a foreign country, right? It's so far from Texas. So I took them up on it, and I went to Boston as my first assignment and did 4 years there. And they brought me back here, and I did a total of 6 years with the military. And I've since separated. I've been a month out, and I'm now with a different employer in a small tech company called Elemental Cognition, and they do natural language processing at a very interesting scale, at an enterprise scale. And happy to go into that later, but I think it's a neat transition as I'm now going into outside of the military and into tech. And so that leads me to the last point, which is throughout my 6 years, but also now, I've had a lot of experience with AI and machine learning, and a lot of exposure generally as to what the applications are as far as these machine learning models and how sophisticated they've grown, and kind of a bit of the evolution within these last 6 years even of what they're capable of doing. So that's a bit about my background, and I'll pause here in case anyone has any questions or comments, because I know I threw out quite a bit. Hearing none, we'll go on to the next one. And like I said, feel free to interject at any point. So artificial intelligence and machine learning, which is why we're here, right? To talk about what these concepts are, what they're doing as far as in the art space specifically. But as we look at this kind of amorphous thing, I say amorphous because AI right now, spans a huge gambit of disciplines. It's also very multidisciplinary, and this is kind of my Venn diagram blobs to show that it is kind of very fuzzy. And I think I say that mostly because AI, which stands for artificial intelligence, encompasses a wide breadth of things, looking at the brain and how the brain processes information to then see how we can apply certain aspects of how our physical brain works to then try to create models that a computer might be able to, model the way we take in the world. It's a very complicated thing, as you can imagine. We haven't been able to map out the human brain as of yet, so much less, apply that to a physical, a human-made kind of brain or physical attributes to a computer-like technology. So I put this book out there. It's called 1,000 Brains, A New Theory of Intelligence by Jeff Hawkins. Really liked this book. I put listening on Audible because I like audiobooks, just because I wanted to throw out that I'm not an avid reader. I don't have time to sit down sometimes, so it's a nice kind of like a compromise. And it really focuses on talking about where we are as far as limitations of the AI space generally, right? As far as humans, we experience emotions. Computers, as of yet, not at least in common thought, have been able to emote and kind of synthesize emotions the way we do as humans, and that's something that's still missing and still crucial to the human experience that we haven't been able to model in our computers, right? A ChatGPT of sorts can tell you that they feel sad, but they don't experience it, and they don't have the visceral reaction that we do, physiologically. So a lot of really interesting aspects and concepts in this book, which is why I threw it out there. And there's also a lot of other really neat books about the topic, so happy to recommend any. But essentially, AI, this intelligence and consciousness is the idea that things can be intelligent enough to maybe memorize something, to pick up on patterns, to maybe move like humans do, and it's typically modeling human behavior is the general understanding, or the general definition that I've understood. And machine learning, as you can see here, is like an under topic of AI. It's umbrellaed under AI. So that's more specifically the technology used around statistical models, and using statistical models to then create these, ChatGPT-like technologies that are essentially trying to pick up patterns from data around the world, around data that's being input into that model. So that ranges everything from from visual data like images, text data that we call corpora, and also things like music that they can then synthesize and pick up different themes on. So yeah, that's machine learning in a general kind of glance. And so I'll stop here if there's any questions, if you guys have any thoughts or questions.
I started that book. It's also really cool about the brain.
Yeah, did you? Oh, that's funny. Yeah, it's really interesting. Yeah, I think it's like chapter 8 that they start talking about the human brain in the way that, and the computers, and how there's still a lot of gaps that I found like really pertinent to this discussion. And yeah, last thing I'll say is, we're in this demo, we're going to go into the art AI ML, like specifically in the field. But the last thing I wanted to say here is like, just like art is also a very large amorphous kind of field, right? It doesn't just mean that you're a visual artist. It doesn't, being creative is also just generally a very large field. So it's worth keeping that in mind as we kind of like move forward with this new with this space where I think we're trying to define parameters, and sometimes it's kind of harder to encapsulate, what is art. And these are certain questions I also ask myself, like, what exactly are we trying to mimic, right? Are we trying to mimic the human experience? Are we trying to mimic, the emotions that art conveys? What exactly are we experiencing? So going on.
Jessica, real quick. I know you're dividing AI and ML, so that's why I have to bring it up. What the tools that we're encountering now, the mid-journeys and all these, is that AI, no longer ML? Is that what we've transitioned to? Is that?
So that is definitely using machine learning models. So AI is the wider umbrella, and I may have explained this improperly. So AI is the wider umbrella, and ML, machine learning, is kind of a subset. It's like a specific tool set within the artificial intelligence space that leverages, that tries to mimic the human behavior, and that's why it's considered to be artificial intelligence. But machine learning, to be fair, is also fairly multidisciplinary in that you have to be, there's a lot of facets of like mathematics, computer science, electrical engineering, so many other facets. But machine learning, the way I've kind of presented it here, is underneath this wider umbrella of AI in the way that we're using it now with ChatGPT and all these other tools that are trying to kind of replace a bit of that those human tasks that we naturally associate with like creative work. So does that answer your question, Sam?
Because I know like machine learning, algorithmic stuff has been around for a long time, but things that are out now, what is different about it? It's just bringing in the human element? Is that what makes it artificial?
No, and actually that's a really good question, because it's not that it's, this is a new concept that we're now, trying to mimic human behavior, not at all. I think what's gotten to this point is, so a little bit of both, and I'm not as well versed in the technology, and I'll be completely transparent here, but it's a little bit of two things. I think the technology and this ChatGPT kind of so happened to commoditize and come out in such a time in which, it was kind of the right time at the right place. And it was a product that had been in development and had been refined so much that these tools were out there before, but their lag time was longer. Performance metrics were just not as sophisticated and as like in real time as they are now, and as they're being presented to us now with the inception of things like ChatGPT. And so for all of those reasons, the fact that like the performance has been brought up into such a level that's now, in real time, about the same, if not better, than what a human could do, especially when it comes to like how long it takes for ChatGPT to give you an output, is the reason why it kind of seems like it's maybe a new space. You know, within the last couple months, there's been a lot of conversation around it. But within the space, a lot of these models have already existed. It's more that they've become more commoditized and they've become improved as far as their performance. Yeah. Does that answer a bit your question? Awesome. Thank you for the question. So going on to, so ARTSMARTai is the demo we're going to be doing today. That's the tool. And I put this disclaimer because I want this to be clear that, you know, this is not an exhaustive tutorial of the tool, but an exploration. And there are a lot of similar technologies. So this is more of kind of reaching conclusions. And so we can prompt it and see the limitations and see the deficiencies of kind of this tool, pros and cons, if you will. And so, yeah, I thought this was a neat example of Neil deGrasse Tyson of like, okay, there's a picture, right? And then there's like this cubist or some sort of surrealist art. Maybe you want the two styles to conjoin, or you want this picture to have this style superimposed on it. And you see this kind of like output of this fun sort of mashup, if you will, of the two images. So I thought that was fun. But this was not ARTSMARTai. This was another tool. And last thing I'll say is there's a nice website called gpte.ai, and it's in the handouts and it's also in the resource link, that has a large buffet of like, it's essentially a library of different tools, and you can go into design, you can go into music, and a lot of those AI machine learning tools that are out there. So this was just one of the ones that I chose, that I just so happened to choose. So all right, so, and let me just kind of start from the beginning. I think it signed me out, just to give you all the full experience, if you will. This is essentially their kind of like homepage, their landing page. So they are, you know, a monetized tool. And so I do also kind of want to prompt this discussion around, you know, a lot of these tools range from being free to anywhere from, you know, a monthly subscription to an annual subscription. So there's still like a wide range of not only the tool sets, but also kind of their pricing models and how they're sort of like, you know, creating these things in the back end. Because I think one thing that's also very important to note is like they require a lot of maintenance and a lot of upkeep as far as like the models and training them and making sure that they're able to do things as quickly and as efficiently as other competitive models, but also stay up to speed with the current technology out there, or with the current updates. So I'll log into my specific account. And what I found neat as well, and this is kind of just me thinking out loud as I was exploring this tool, because I think, oh no, yeah, log in with my Google account, that's right. So this is what you kind of are exposed to. This is the portal that they give you. And this specific tool, you know, a bit of the marketing, and I want to go into this as well, you know, a bit of the marketing around it for me, when I first saw this, you know, ARTSMARTai, I thought, okay, this is going to encompass, you know, art generally. And one thing I found when I, you know, got into the actual product is that a lot of it is encompassed around like faces and selfies and, you know, a kind of similar theme and style. And, you know, I can't pinpoint it because I know it's more fluid than that, but it feels like a bit of this, like kind of sci-fi sort of like trend that was going on with this other tool called Lensa AI, where people were taking selfies and creating it into, you know, different mock-up, like in space or like as a fairy. So I found that very interesting because I thought, okay, this is curious that I feel like they're kind of following a trend here, and they're kind of following more of like what's hot and what's new and what's trendy right now. So these are kind of the apps, if you will, that they have, the different kind of products that they're sort of gauging towards. And I just clicked on one of them. And the good thing is that you can come here and essentially modularly like choose a different mode. So you can also, that home page, that landing page, you can also just do it from this kind of playground is what they call it. And so the idea here is that we put in a prompt. So they give you kind of like some examples here. So cyberpunk dog, ultra realistic, concept art. So these are some of the ideas. And if you look at, they have some documentation as well. I forgot the exact link I found this in. I think I Googled this, but ArtSmart like documentation as to how to feed them prompts. So I found this, a good tool, especially coming from a technical background. I thought, okay, interesting that they have documentation. This is generally what I would find, if I were a software engineer, right? How to prompt this thing. And something that I found interesting. Oh, yeah, there we go. So it says like, let's examine the difference between a simple prompt and a descriptive prompt. So like human, and then a descriptive prompt would be like more descriptive, right? Human, expressionism, centered, full, et cetera, with a lot of these other kind of encaptured themes. So I say this because once again, looking at kind of the barrier to entry, looking at if a person who maybe doesn't know about art would be able to maybe come up with prompts is also something that ran through my head. Like, would I know all of these words if I, wasn't traditionally an artist? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe I'd have to do some research first before trying this. So I had put some prompts here, or sorry, I had written some notes about kind of a prompt that I wanted to try. And this is not even as descriptive, so we can definitely add more to this. And I also noticed that it took a little bit of time. So let's just see what this gives me. I put Cubist style illustration, modern indie art with a melancholic mood, no people, still life. And so I want to see what it comes out with. And we'll kind of build on this, and feel free to throw out ideas because once again, this is just exploratory. So this is, interesting. A couple of things that come to mind, and I'll get back to this later as well. So here you can also add these different modes, and I think you guys may have seen them earlier as I pointed them out, but there's also a more realistic mode. So we can play a bit with like giving it maybe a more realistic take. So let's try that. And, a couple things that come to mind once again is, something that I might try to prompt for later is like, what if I wanted something that was softer or had brush strokes or felt like it had texture? Being kind of an artist and looking at the art elements, if you will, a lot of these pictures also from the initial landing page looked a little bit more graphic and more like graphic artistry than they did like, someone who had actually, put pen to canvas or what have you, and have more of a physical real life element to it. So first I'm going to put this realistic kind of filter, if you will. I'm not sure, or mode is what they call it. And I'll go into that. Let's see. Yeah, and I did notice that sometimes, because I did, try this tool beforehand, and the first prompt seemed to be a little quicker. The second prompt seemed to take a little longer if I like changed one or two variables in the feature. Okay, so that's interesting. Right, yeah, I'm like, okay, I can dig that. Like, I can even find a bit of inspiration in that. I like the colors, which I think is interesting because I said melancholic mood, and I do like it, but I don't feel like it's particularly melancholic. But we can play with this and maybe, what is it we're going to say? Yeah, I'm going to say brush strokes. Maybe I add strokes. Maybe I add fully textured or something to kind of prompt it that I want less, less 2D-ness, that I want more maybe more dynamic aspects to it, maybe dynamic features. We'll see what that gives me. So just with those 3 extra prompts. And a prompt, just for reference too, technically is also called a seed, which I actually found out looking through tutorials. So if you see that word, oh, very interesting. That's also kind of a word for prompt. So this is the prompt or the seed. Very interesting. This looks like a house, kind of an abstract house, sort of like origami style, opening up into these different elements, which I think is interesting. I'm gonna really double down on the kind of moodiness of it all, because it clearly didn't understand my melancholic message. So I'm curious as to why, which I like it. I don't have a problem with this. Let's see, moody. Dom, do you have any other descriptive word that you want to add to it? Bleak. Let's do bleak. Is that how you spell it? Yeah, that's how you spell bleak. Don Juan, how do you? What else would you want to throw in here? You want to add sneakers? Should we add sneakers? Let's add sneakers. Hey, I know. Let's do sneakers. Zach, anything? Pringles. All right. Let's see what it gives us. We threw a lot at it. People? You want people? Yeah, I did, unfortunately. We can try people. Interesting. Very interesting. And very cool to see the evolution of this too, right? From where we started to kind of where we are now, as far as like there's a lot of still stringing themes that are kind of still in the picture. Once again, what I find interesting is these colors don't particularly strike me as moody. I like them a lot, but it doesn't particularly, it's kind of more vibrant, but they kind of stayed with the same color theme. I love the shoe. I think it's really cool. It's a really cool take on this. So, and as you can see, yeah, please.
So let's say you like this, but you don't like the yellow background.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe you don't, maybe it's not the yellow background. Maybe you don't know what you don't like, but you like the shoe part. Every time you put something in new, you don't know what's going to come up.
That's a really good question. So what I've seen different people do is like, I could save this picture and then come back. There's a couple things. So if you know specifically what you don't like, right, you can save the picture, and this tool also serves like as a kind of photo editor. So you can do things like, and I haven't played with this tool as much, but you can do things from what I understood, like taking out the background and then changing that color explicitly to a yellow background or what have you. But then if you don't know what you don't like about it, I think that's a bit trickier. But what you can do, as I think through it, is like you might be able to save the picture and then come back. And this is actually interesting. You can prompt it with your own image of something. So we can come back and we can try this actually. We can come back and essentially tell it, we want this, but different, right? And then play with that prompt and see if that will generate something else. One thing that I found interesting is that so 2 things, and this is something that I don't have ground truth on, so I don't want to like claim that I know this for sure, but from what I understood, if you were to feed it the same prompt in a different computer or what have you, it should give you the same output, which I find interesting. And I don't know if I understood that correctly, because I found it to be relatively, how do you call it, relatively, there's a word I'm looking for, deterministic, if it already had these kind of, this kind of prompt that it already generates an image. Because as I think about it, if this is pulling from the internet or what have you, whatever it's pulling from, the internet changes every millisecond, right? So like, I'd imagine that this should prompt a slightly different image, depending on whatever it's feeding off of, which is another curious question. I actually don't know where this is feeding off of. I would think that it's the internet.
Or maybe you have a database and that's how it's coming up with the same thing.
Yeah,
Maybe,
exactly.
Like, get rid of your history or go to another computer.
Exactly, and that's a curious question, and that's something that we can look into, and maybe there's something in the documentation that would say something.
It's like if you, for example, could be like working in layers,
Mm-hmm.
like Procreate or so, like, but like
like with this.
With this.
Interesting. So, like, kind of like going off of her question of like, could you
build
build?
like
Yeah,
the
like
same?
if
I
I
was
want
like
to add
thinking
something on
about
top, or if I,
like what if you like they separated instead of like just the one paragraph?
Mm-hmm.
It's like different. Could you get different paragraph like yellow background, melancholic, and then you start like turning off and on. Probably.
Like certain layers or certain
Like
features or certain
Procreate, like you
things.
used to do that, like you can work on layers or illustration.
See, that's really curious, and I'm actually, I mean, let's look it up, because this to me looks like a static image that even if I were to download, it would be like a JPEG, and I probably wouldn't be able to separate it into different layers. A limitation. Yeah, exactly. It's already merged. And that is actually a really good point. And I was telling Zach, but just generally, I'm not a digital artist by trade, and that's definitely also a limitation, because I've used Procreate, but I know of the layers, and I haven't really leveraged them as much as I should. So that's not something that would initially come to mind. But you're absolutely right. I don't know if, at least in this tool, it doesn't appear to be the case that you can break it up into layers like that, which is a fascinating thing, right? Because as a Photoshop artist, as a Procreate artist, you would want that liberty. Maybe you're designing a logo and maybe you want to change the color scheme, right? And you don't want to be tied to these colors, but you like the design, right? What do you do? And so, yeah, please.
But this is not made for artists, right? This is made for people who want to get rid of the middleman and be able to just do it themselves.
Great question. I mean, is it? I think that's a bit of the question why we're here for too. Like these tools, for example, Excel, when Excel came around, it revolutionized the way in that we were taking in information. Maybe we didn't need notepads anymore, but we still needed CPAs, right? We still needed people to use those tools. And I think in a lot of ways, these kinds of technologies are disruptive, but it's also prompting the question, like, no pun intended, but prompt engineers are now becoming a thing. People who are actually trained and supposed to have knowledge of how to prompt these models, are people who are now coming to the forefront of, how do you leverage these tools and how do you work with the limitations or the inputs that you can give them. And so I find that very curious, because to your just like a model like ChatGPT can be very powerful, it can also be, as powerful as how to use the tool and and how you've been taught to kind of prompt it and where you even know to dig, right? You don't know what you don't know. So these are all like super interesting questions. I think that's why we're grappling with them. Because these tools, and going back to the layering thing, are tools that I believe a lot of artists were probably not involved in the making of these tools, and proof is that they have not thought of these more corner cases that aren't even corner cases. These are very common cases in the digital arts, right? But they probably don't see that because they don't explore that as artists. It's more technologists. And so once again, these are interesting discussions to have, because even once looking at natural language processing, linguists have to be involved in that, because they know about the syntactical, semantic way of language, phonetically what language means. Google Alexa doesn't work perfectly with someone with a German accent speaking in English or with a Spanish accent speaking in English, despite the fact that they're speaking the same language. And so those are kind of the limitations where, these technologies are definitely here and they're here to stay and they're definitely disruptive. But I love the question because it also poses really clear examples of how there are so many limitations still with this tech, and a lot of it is still kind of relatively trendy. And these tools, once again, can't emote. They don't understand as far as like they are sophisticated in that they can leverage terabytes of data that's on the internet, but they also have limitations as far as their use cases.
So it's almost like you gotta learn how to speak computer.
Yep.
Yeah.
Amen.
Just the same
Yep.
as just the same as a Google search or a YouTube search.
Yep.
Like there's certain, I don't know, like certain way you think, or certain way I think when I'm looking for specific things. Whereas one word, or if I switch the words, then I come up with a whole nother thing.
Yep.
You know, Google
Absolutely.
will, YouTube will spit out a whole nother thing, and it's almost like learning how to speak computer instead of them learning how to speak human, because that is way off. That's not, I don't even, just like you said about how we don't really understand the human brain yet. We don't understand ourselves yet. So how is it that we're gonna make a thing that can do what we do?
Exactly.
This is the only reason I don't really see it as to be as disruptive as some people claim.
Exactly. And go ahead, Jess.
Well, I do have two, a middle schooler and a high schooler. So what teens are doing right now is they're using this AI to have their homework assignments, to have their essays, and to have all this done. So it's causing a lot of chaos in schools right now, just because of everything that these young kids are actually using it for. So in the end, it's great to have this.
Medium,
Yeah.
technology,
Technology, but it's causing our teens to actually not use their brains. Yes.
I think some of that stuff, like, okay, like for instance, like the chat GPT, like really that's, I mean, still just taken from the internet, it's taking what's already out there and just kind of jumbling it up and making it its own thing. It's still not gonna do something like Ernest Hemingway or Shakespeare, or you know, some sort of actual creative writing that came from an actual human. It can't compete. It can't compare.
So how is the new generation gonna be when they're trying to do all their homework assignments, art, and anything with the AI? So what is that gonna make? What is human race gonna be like?
I personally think homework is, that was always, I always understood homework to just be like pointless, honestly. You know, because it's, I mean,
But that could just be from a teacher perspective.
I mean,
That could be how your brain works. Some kids really do need that repetition,
Yeah.
and those might be the same kids that are using,
yeah, I
you
get
know, like
that
this
too. Yeah.
program. That's why I'm like, it's not really made for artists. It's kind of made for people who want to have art on demand, because you can see like all of our questions are grappling with like, but what about the process? But someone who's using it is probably not thinking about the process. It's doing the process that the artist would do in its own way. So I can like see where both of you guys are coming from, because I'm like, you're right, they can't create original ideas. They can't, which is what artists do. We come up with creative ideas. So like even as an artist, I could come up with an idea and then put it in here that someone who might not have that background would not be able to do. It's just a matter of your skill level as a human when you're using it. But I can also see how it's coming into play where if kids are not learning how to process things because they're going to the computer to do the process, then they're now lacking a major skill that we use like across humanism, like in more than just art and learn. Like we use that in our day to day. So it's kind of like
Yeah, I think
they
most of
have
that,
to learn the skill to be able to come up with the original ideas. If they're not learning the skill to be able to create our own original ideas, whether it's in art and business, whatever, that's going to be a disconnect. And I think that's like what you're touching on, right?
Yes, that's
Like-
exactly. Yes, that's
Because
exactly.
it's only getting younger and younger and younger. It's like, it's self-taught. It's becoming self-taught, which in itself, that is a skill. So it's like you're just going to keep going back and forth, back and forth. Because like, it's a new skill base that kids are getting. Like their ability to be able to go to a computer and do that when like I'm 30, I can't do that. I don't know what to do now. But you know, they can do that and we can't, or some of us cannot. It's just a matter of like, what kind of skills are we learning now? Like he said, to be able to talk to computers, or the skill to be able to process things and come up with concepts in our heads, you know? Like, it feels like they're gonna get to a point where they have to pick one, or it's gonna go more one way than the other. And how will that disrupt, like, not to be dramatic, but humanity?
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think piggybacking off of that, that's one of the questions we have to ask ourselves as a society. What do we value? What are the skills we value in our society? Do we want to have, a group of artists and a group of firemen and a group of mathematicians, and then maybe have that ability to train them up and have exposure, but also have the tools to, facilitate some quick accounting with these tools, and not, how are we leveraging these tools as an asset for being able to do creative work, or work that is still cannot be outsourced to a machine, or work that people still find innately valuable for humans to do, and balancing it with, but we're also maybe deficient in other skills now because we have all of these options, right? I can't do, simple math as well as my parents' generation can, because they didn't have as much access to a phone and a computer, right? Or a calculator, right? So all of these questions of what are the skills, and really asking ourselves, like, what are the skills that we value in our society? To your point, what are the skills that are really, that we value, we see as human, we see as innate to the human experience, and how are we kind of creating less friction for creative work, while still not being completely, useless if we were to also not have these computers in hand, right? That's another question. Like, what does this mean? Do we now become kind of paraplegic if now we don't have our phones? Sometimes I feel that way. Sometimes I feel like I can't get home, right, without my phone. And so all of these things, that to what extent are these technologies crippling us? To what extent are they empowering us? And once again, the human experience of, like, what do we value? I think in art, one thing that I value, and we were saying, this with you, Dom, too, for me, it's a mode of human expression. It's an outlet for me. And I think that people who enjoy my art see it as such, and they value it because it was made by me, through my lens, through my human experience, with my background, with all of my different biases and whatnot. And they value that because it tells a story in a way that technology like this is still stale. And what story does that technology exactly tell, right? Like, a bunch of software engineers got together and created it. Okay, that's interesting, right? Like, and maybe there's interest there, but not to everyone. And so that's why all of these kind of creative backgrounds, I think, is extremely interesting, because at the end of the day, a lot of this is still, and what I think is honestly going to happen is, art, AI, ML is going to be a space within its own, within the arts, but it's not going to encompass the entire artistic realm. And because so much of that, once again, is the value that we put in human experience. And Roshan spoke to this a lot, but and I totally agree with him. We don't know where this is going. We don't know, for better, for worse, for lesser, for poorer, for what have you. But it's also kind of interesting to see, well, we as humans also have a say in this. We're consumers of these tools. We're artists. We can also speak to, the limitations, the ways that we see this. And so one of the biggest things that I want all of us to take from this talk, and also empower other artists, is, like, question these things, play with these things, look into these things, because as an artist, we have the responsibility to also communicate on behalf of, like, our community of artists, to say, look, this thing, yes, sure, you can create a Dali looking dog, but, or Picasso looking apple, but at the same time, it doesn't really give you, like you were saying, a unique experience, a unique prism to which to view life, a story behind it. It feels empty. Exactly.
I mean, to me, it feels more like they just have to like what the computer is doing, instead of, like, they being original with an idea that come from them. So me as a teacher artist, sometimes is my priority is to let them. I don't teach them how to color something or draw. I just say, like, let's draw an apple, and they're gonna draw an apple the way that they imagine, and it doesn't have to be my imagination. It's their imagination working the way that their own brain work, because our brains work differently.
Exactly.
And also we all have abilities, or talents that we have when we were born, and this is what makes you different from another person.
Amen.
Right? So if we are gonna be just like liking it, oh yeah, I can agree or not agree with that image and say like, yeah, I like it. Okay, that's perfect. Yeah, this is me. And it is not. I mean,
Yeah.
it's confusing.
And I actually want to piggyback off that too, because, and this is also a lot of the nature of the internet, and we see this in our phones all the time. I like a certain thing, you like a certain thing, it feeds me certain things. And there's also a lot of things that are kind of pawned on us as far as content that, then we start seeing it. Maybe, this looks like a very generic, similar thing. And a lot of that, to your point, lacks a lot of that human experience in that, that variety and that diversity that I would see out in the world if I go out to the world. If I want to be clouded behind the things I like and the things I'm comfortable with, the internet is a great place to do that, because I now, with all of these tools that reinforce the things you're searching, you kind of are, self-fulfilling, seeing similar things, and that spans the gambit of different things, not just art, but it does start learning. Okay, these are the things I like. And part of the human experience is also, once again, variety. You say apple, maybe that apple looks different from someone coming from Asia than someone coming from Europe than someone coming from, Latin America. And they're drawing different styles of apples. And that in itself is beautiful. And so to your point, that ability that the human experience has to learn on the fly from our own individual prisms, I think is also what's refreshing about life, because a lot of these models, because they're also feeding from the internet, and because to some degree the internet at a specific given time is relatively finite, right? There's only so many sources, although there's dozens and trillions of data out there as far as images. Because they're coming from a very specific sliver of time, they could be getting very similar images, right? Even though the models may be different, but assuming that they're trying to please the person for the average trendy thing out there, they can also sometimes start becoming very similar tools. And I think one of the things in art I love is variety, right? Like going to a museum, seeing something, and then turning the corner, not expecting that, turning the corner, okay, that's not how I would have done it, but that's really cool. So all of that, once again, the diversity that we have is something we as artists need to leverage from these tools that I think are going to be their own medium, their own niche tool set, worth knowing, worth considering, but also have their limitations. And so is worth considering. Yeah, what are your thoughts, Zach?
Oh, lots, I guess, but I think that fine artists overall are probably not at risk for any sort of like displacement by AI because of exactly what you said. It comes from the heart. It's valued because it comes from the heart. But I think there is an interesting question that like artists on an individual basis can dive into, and it's like, if we can make an image just by spinning it up with words, and the like craft of creating it by hand has been proven that you can skip it, at least in some cases. Like, what does it mean to be an artist in the day and age? And I think it's like a totally valid pursuit of art to make objects that are beautiful or personal or ugly or like whatever that you want to do and put them on painting and canvas. But I will tell you, there's going to be some artists that are going to be making stuff on there, getting very specific with what the like painterly aspect should look like, and then doing a G-clay print of it and selling it for like $150, and like no one will know the difference, because art paintings are already digitized and then turned into prints. So I think like futures like that are interesting to look at and like consider where we fall and what stance we take as artists individually on it. I think if you are interested in making any kind of art whatsoever with AI, it has to go beyond that stage. And there's a lot of ways to do that, but just as a one example, like this is cool to get an image, but like what you were saying with working with layers, like I could imagine a collage in my head and not necessarily want to spend all the time sourcing images for that collage, but I could start using that and make like 50 images and then collage them in with layers the way I want to. Or I could conceptualize a music video in its entirety, and I could like create the scenes for that music video, stage them out, and then I could convince an entire like film set based on my mood board that it's a good idea, just because I've been able to create some like visual deliverable that's cheaper and more costly than like going and getting those scenes on film. So
It's kind of like what he said. It's a matter of just learning a new skill, which is being able to talk to it the right way.
yeah,
I have seen like, for instance, shoe designs that blow me away, and I know I can make that. You know, it looks like a real shoe, but it's not a real shoe. It's 2 left feet. Or you can look at it, and artists can tell that that's not real. You know, there's something about that that's just not real. But I can make that though. It's beautiful. If I made it in real life, it would be nice. So I see, you know, like designing things like a new toaster or a new car or stuff like that, you know, designing some things, I can see how AI art can be really useful.
Exactly.
It's a tool for sure.
I think if you're not in the digital space, like, yeah, it's kind of exciting as an artist because it's not really as much of the digital or the fine art, it's not really as much, or street art, it's not really as much of a threat. But I'm wondering, like, if anyone does digital art or they work like in a graphic design aspect, I think those are the people who may be more at risk because if you just think about, like you said, the algorithms, how much things are just put in front of us at the pace. They're not seeing like little details that we're seeing as artists. We're kind of like a very controlled group in here. And so it's like maybe it's not necessarily about trying to get rid of something, but like you said, what do we value? Maybe we haven't put enough value on art in our education so that when people see something, they're not just how can I say, it's like emoting with it or like having an emotional conversation with it, but they can also do the same thing that a lot of artists can do, which is look at something and be like, well, I can tell you that that's higher level because of the shadowing, or you know what I mean, the texture is something special, or I know they have to do something extra to get this like collage to work the way that it does, or these materials to work the way that they're interacting with each other. Maybe we should be teaching, I mean, I'm always gonna say the kids, but kids or adults, how to like better read art. Like maybe that in itself should be a type of literature and not something that is privileged information.
Yeah.
I think also the mistakes too. Like
But that makes it sometimes.
Yeah, the mistakes, like it's AI art a lot of times is just almost too perfect. You know, it's always spot on. Like no way you did that with your hand.
It's like creepy a little bit. It's like
creepy.
something's always off about it.
Oh my goodness.
But
I get
I've
creeped out.
wondered if that's just like an artist thing, like if it's because I look at art and do art that I'm like, something looks off. Like
No.
immediately we put those on there, I'm like, something's off. I don't even need to like stare at it. I don't want to look at it. Something's not right. That's not human.
Don't even want to look. You hit it on the head.
But it's like, again, we're a controlled group. So it's like, I don't know if normal people who don't just spend their day interacting with like higher thinking around art, because I mean, art is everywhere, you know, but I don't know if they're looking at it and they're like, what?
no, I'm both. What you mentioned, I do graphic design and like content production in my day job, and so I like, as an artist, I'm curious as a tool, but in my day job, I'm like, I do suffer the pressure, not so much from any like one manager or boss being like, oh, you gotta deploy AI, or like, there's 3 of you and 2 of them, or you're gonna go, but more like someone out there is using AI to be faster than me.
Yeah, it's speed.
Yeah, and so if I don't learn it, I won't be fast enough to create the images, I won't be fast enough to create the concepts and like map out a strategy and stuff like that. So I use AI all the time in my day job for those more like efficiency reasons. But yeah, there's a whole different consideration when I get inside my artist brain about like, what does it mean philosophically, ethically, what does it mean for like what makes good art when certain images can be replaced with like a button click and stuff like that.
Do you worry that the speed is going to get to a point where you can't keep up with being able to put as much like thought and input into even like the creative idea, like the concepts?
I feel like the concepts will be the only things that matter in the end, actually. So I think it'll be people who know how to think about the concepts, like you said, as artists, and visualize something before knowing what to say in computer speak, or before like, you know, talking to someone else about it, being able to think with a vision, and then being able to say like, okay, what would I do to complete this? And then AI being a part of that discussion. Like maybe your strategy is, okay, I need to hire 7 actors, and I need to like plot these scenes over time for a video, but I want to do a 30-second B-reel clip that's generated from AI. You know, like it's just, it falls into that plan, and the more you can reap efficiencies without sacrificing on artistic quality, even if it's in the context of like a business space, they still see those like, that looks creepy. Like I tried to clone a chief medical officer at a healthcare company in AI one time, and I cloned his image. It would have saved me monthly, probably like 10 to 15 hours a week of both of our times, and they said no, because his voice didn't sound like quite right. It sounded too machine, you know, like, so they notice and they send it back.
Yes, please.
So I would like for me, it's kind of like expanding options, you know, like, because it's, I mean, it's, I think like we're entering into an era that is, and we have plenty of options. And I think that like honesty is gonna be taking the like the level of how honest you are, like as an artist, as putting together, but also if you think about it, it's an opening to, for example, disability. What if somebody can be able to use their physical like arms, or and then now with their voice can be able to draw something that they like wanted to do it so badly, and like right now everybody has their phones and they're like so, I mean, you can do fantastic photos with the regular phones that we have. If you think like 20 years ago, you have to go with a professional photographer. So now I think it's also good that we can reach the art like something like daily. Of course, there will be levels, or you can have this amount of options to prefer where you want. Like I want to be like, I want you to do a customized art for me, for my house or my business or something in particular. Then there will be artists for everything, and I think you know who is honest and who's not. But also, like we see it also like I was talking to Matilde, like food, for example. We have the option to grow our own food or just buy it as a capsule with superfoods, you know. So we have those. So I think as much as possibilities are like invented, it would be a better word. But I think just being honest and putting in work in the right like way, and also giving credit to those amazing engineers, which sometimes it's like the people that are making the art gets like a lot of things, and then what are those engineers that make this possible? Are they receiving the like, where's the fair trade around this too?
Oh, they got a lot of money coming in. They were all taken care of. But you're right, like
but
credit.
Probably the one that just made it like, and it was like the first idea. I mean, like the whole chain to be like really, really paid in a fair way. Not just like I bring this idea and then I just sell it at $10 and then they doing millions with the same idea that I sell it to any big tech company.
Do you publish your work online?
No.
If you did, like, you'd be a part of the conversation too, because it's studying all of our work who post online as well.
A really good
point. Well, I have my blog where I put my artwork that I have, and that's why. But I'm not posting yet on like social media that much.
Your blog counts though. If there was like a what are they called?
Crawlers or something.
I was thinking when they sue at a big point, if everyone had ever sued, like a collective lawsuit, you'd be someone to get a payout. A candidate for a payout, because everyone that posts their media currently is getting these AIs to look at it and train on it, and then getting nothing from it. Even like if you were to look at that macro scale, like yours might be like a fraction of a cent, but you know, from that perspective, it's still like how do we even sort out that equation of equity?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what's the supply chain, if you will, right, of all of these ideas? Like, that's a really good point. And like you said, a tool can be used for good, a tool can be used for bad, to copyright your stuff. And That's where it's like, where are the laws? And I'm actually curious, how laws are going to change around a lot of these copyright and personal, property that's out there, physical and digital property. And even law itself is curious. I can now create, taxes and not have like, an accountant look at them. And if they're simple enough, then I feel confident submitting my taxes, right? Or I can create my own, sublease or what have you, which that's been around for a while. There's been templates out there for a while, but even more sophisticated things that are now coming to the forefront that are making the whole kind of different industries having to have these conversations, right? That's bukus of money that lawyers make in creating these like very intricate contracts that now maybe a machine can make and save another company, especially if you're looking at the like large enterprise business scale, companies trying to cut costs, right? Okay, maybe we don't, we digitize that art guy, maybe we digitize that lawyer, maybe we, what have you. And those are, once again, those questions of like, how as we as consumers and maybe asking for that transparency. And sometimes it feels like we're just a grain of sand in the ocean, but we do, with having these conversations, really start up a fire of like, these are interesting conversations to have, right? Do I buy from this store because it's probably not giving those people who are actually laboring for that clothes the same amount, or do I do this more local store where I can see and it's more transparent, like you were saying, how that process is made. So lots of super interesting questions, and asking for those questions. Yeah, please.
I think that's what kind of makes it worrisome, is that it does kind of come back to values, and like how she kind of mentioned, like with photography, you look around how many like family photography stores you see anymore. It's kind of like the bottom is who gets cut first, and look at the world right now.
Yeah, and that's where that flexibility, I think, is such a key role, right? Even if you're not using these technologies, knowing about them and having exposure to them, I think is powerful, is extremely powerful, because I, as a mom and pop with a photography store, knowing that now the Instagrams of the world, that I'm competing with people who don't have brick and mortars, who aren't paying for rent, gas, light, electricity, all that stuff. Like, how am I competing with those when my bottom dollar is going towards like all these other overhead costs, and they're having a storefront from the internet, right? They don't need a physical store. So all of these things of like kind of, and no one can know everything. And of course it's like incredibly difficult to know the latest, but having those conversations and trying to stay a bit, adept and open to looking at the tools and what they're, what new is happening, I think is extremely important for us as artists, but just generally anyone in any space. Because I think what this also goes to show is that we have to be willing to be flexible and learn and adapt, because jobs that were there, we still need plumbers, we still need firefighters, we still need this, that, and the other. But in certain jobs, like we were saying, just because food can come from a tablet doesn't mean that we take it. Certain things stick, certain things don't. Socially, certain things, even if we could have a flying car, maybe that doesn't stick for more reasons than one. But socially, social pressure does have a lot of power. And so what does that mean for future jobs, right? So many jobs 10 years from now are not going to look the same as they do now, similar to 10 years ago. And knowing, kind of like being open to having those, kind of keeping your finger in the pulse as best you can as to how that evolution is happening is extremely important. And being part of the discussion, I think, is extremely important.
So kind of detrimental to just people who might want to become artists when you think about it. When you were going to school, the first thing you heard about was the job opportunity.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. A historian, right? Someone who maybe writes for a living now, ChatGPT, and then you're like, wow, I just studied all those Shakespeare novels, and now, ChatGPT does that in a second. What was that? Or translators, all of that stuff. Exactly. And so that's where, and it's so sad, but more niche fields and knowing kind of those limitations of the technology. But it is really hard, because there's certain people that they don't get that opportunity, right? Their boss sees it before they do, you're out, right? Like, I don't need a translator anymore, right? I've got this other tool that does the job, and you don't have a time to flinch and react to that. And that's extremely hard. And I think, these are the pros and cons, and I don't have a strict answer for that. And those are really tough calls, but that is the world we live in. And to your point, like, where's the value proposition in that, and what are the kind of conversations around that, and maybe having conversations proactively about, like, are these jobs being, like, outsourced to machines, right? Like kind of seeing what the water cooler talk is. And these are just examples I'm throwing out there, but I know a lot of jobs may be more dispensable because of all these tools, right?
Yeah, please. No, I'm also thinking about these people that doesn't have the creative side on them. Also,
Yeah.
this will be a fantastic tool for them because we have students sometimes that they get in, they're like, I'm very bad at this. This is not my strongness,
Exactly.
and I don't know how to do it. And they start like feeling like frustrated and overwhelmed when the next person has amazing abilities for drawing or creating art. So this also can produce or motivate students or people that doesn't have that ability to create something and then get the likes that they want, right? Like, oh my God, you did this, it's amazing, and their self-esteem will go to the top, and they're like, oh, I can do this, I can create this. It's just like, kind of. I mean, even though if you didn't make it with your hands.
Absolutely, 100%. Like you're saying, the concepts will matter, right? Like just because I'm not good at like drawing in pencil this beautiful face doesn't mean that I don't have these awesome ideas that I can express and that people find valuable. And yeah, it's a tool, and as a society. And then to Jesse's point, where do we then say, okay, well then you no longer have to try this certain skill because you're not good at it. And those are also very interesting discussions, right? I'm sure even as parents, I'm not a parent myself, but imagining like a parent, like where do I help them when they're struggling? Where do I let them struggle for them to learn for themselves? And how as a society, we're kind of like teaching ourselves like to which point do we allow people to struggle and to which point do we facilitate them with these tools, right? Because I think human nature strives towards easier things just because, that's kind of the way we are, right? And so I feel like we all know grit and struggling helps us learn and grow. And there's certain things that I was never good at, and then I became good at them just by the sheer nature of practicing them. So super interesting discussion of like, yeah, what does that mean then, right?
Did you have a
Yeah, no, I want to piggyback off everything that you're saying, and also what you were saying of, are we going to get more specific, or could we get more specific around what kind of praise because that is what a lot of us are geared towards, praise that we're giving like to the kids to say like, yeah, you are good at conceptualizing versus just you're an artist, because then you have people using AI and they're making other artists who may not be in a conceptual area but might not have that knowledge either. They're getting deterred, because they're seeing something come out fast and quick and shiny, and they're having to go through the process of seeing something from beginning and seeing it through fruition, And so it's just like, it really feels like AI in general is just pushing on a lot of our values, and just as a society seems too small, as a world, and it's going to create like a restructuring is going to be necessary, because if it's not, then it's just like going to double down on all these other aspects of our life: mental health, education, art, jobs,
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a company that I interviewed with which actually looks at careers. So if I was a plumber now and I then wanted to become a nurse, right? Like what the idea was, like the lowest barrier to entry for me to become a nurse. And I actually didn't use the tool, and I'm curious now. I didn't get a live demo either, but the idea is it would facilitate me with the tools, the training. Maybe it would send me to the Coursera course, YouTube, university. It would pull from all these different resources and tell me, okay, these are the skills you have now. These are the skills that you're going to develop as a nurse. And the hope is that you, with these like YouTubes and all these other trainings, become a nurse. And now I've facilitated, this tool that is also based out of machine learning models to help train me and to help skill me to become more useful to society, right? And I know this because I also can crunch the numbers and see, oh, the state of Oregon needs a lot more nurses, right? Or the state of New York is looking for a lot more psychologists. And now I have that lower barrier to entry because these machines are facilitating that for me. So so yeah, super fascinating discussions. And so no, I really appreciate all of you guys like being a part of this. And I just want to say, as we can continue conversation, but anyone who needs to leave or wants to leave, you're welcome to. But I love this conversation because I think it's like, I could talk about it all day because I think it's an extremely interesting topic that we're looking at, but we shouldn't be passive about this knowledge, right? Like, we should be part of the dialogue as well, as artists, as creators, as people who are part of this community, are part of this space. Austin's a huge like mecca for artists and artistic, individuals, and I can imagine it'll continue to be so. And despite, with that in mind, we're exposed to people, whether indirectly or directly, and sometimes we don't even know it, and we leave like a lasting impact. And so I think these ideas and discussions are super important, just generally, but, to carry them out into your communities. And I love that there's so many different perspectives, because I wouldn't have seen that from the eyes of a teacher, from the eyes of a mother, from the eyes of someone who makes sneakers, which is so freaking awesome. Like, all of these perspectives are super unique, and once again, part of the value in being artists and creatives in like a community like this. So I really want to exchange contact info with all of you all, if you have the time and desire as well. If you all have like blogs or something like that, and I'm happy to share mine as well. It got cut off, but I'll definitely like put it, or I think it's in the notes. But yeah, thank you all so much for coming. I really appreciate it. Thank you for the discussion. Thank you.